Erev Tov, and good evening, everyone. Chanukah Sameach, first of all. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the YCT Community Shemitah Beit Midrash, our third session tonight. Joining us on the last night of Hanukkah, a very special opportunity for us to join together, to learn together. And I want to make a special welcome tonight to members of all the different communities, the different partner communities joining us from around the United States. From Minneapolis, from St. Louis, from Riverdale, from Rockville, from Maryland, various places in Maryland, from, where I mentioned Rockville, from Beth Tefillah in Baltimore, from Netivot Shalom as well in Baltimore, from Kesher Israel in Washington, D.C., from ASBI in Chicago, from Moses Montefiore, Anshe Emunah in Baltimore, from the South Philadelphia Shtibel in Philadelphia, from Congregation Beth Shalom in Potomac, Maryland, from Beth Israel in Berkeley, California, from the Hebrew Institute of White Plains in White Plains, New York, as well. Thank you to our partners, Yeshivat Maharat, Horat, and the International Rabbinic Fellowship. And a special welcome tonight, of course, to members of Skokie Valley Agudath Jacob in Chicago. Rabbi Ari's already cheering. And I want to say a special welcome, not just because we get to hear from and enjoy your rabbi tonight, but also because Rabbi Ari, your shul, was instrumental in getting this Shemitah Beit Midrash off the ground. It was members of your community who said to us about a year ago, we should have a community Beit Midrash. We should do it at SVAJ. We'll bring people from YCT and it'll be great. And we at YCT said to them, it'll be great, and it won't just be members of your shul. Let's make it not just members of the Chicago Jewish community. Let's bring people throughout the United States and Canada together for this opportunity. And here we are learning together, Rav Ari, your shul's leadership with your partnership is part of that. Such an important effort in bringing people together, learning about Shemitah as one. Before we begin tonight, I do want to take a moment and remind people that we have an opportunity tonight to take advantage both of American Sign Language, ASL interpretation, as well as closed captioning. Adina is on the screen, closed captioning for, providing ASL interpretation for us as well. We have closed captioning taking place in the background. You can press the CC button for yourself in order to take advantage of that opportunity as well. And Rav Ari, as we think about Shemitah, we think a lot about the previous two sessions, of course, at this special time of the year, this most wonderful time of the year, some would even say. We learned a couple of months ago with Rabbanit Leah Sarna about the idea of time management in Shemitah. Last month, we heard from Rav Chaim Schaffner about thinking about Shemitah of the land, Shemitat Karkaot. And tonight, we're going to think about another aspect of Shemitah, the idea of Shemitat Kesafim, the fact that there is economic benefit perhaps to Shemitah for some, perhaps economic non-benefit for others. You'll tell us more about that, and we'll think about that tonight. And as we go in tonight, I want us to think about this question of what does it mean that the Torah asks us to think about debt differently than simply about the way that I relate to another human being, but that there is a God aspect to this as well. There's a sense of commandedness. And I want us to go into our conversation tonight thinking about that, of course, Rav Ari, as you take us away and we think about this. And I'll remind everyone that we will remain muted tonight during our conversation. You're welcome to put questions into the chat. Rav Ari and I will both be monitoring those questions. We look forward to a wonderful conversation over the next 45 or so minutes that we have together. Rav Ari, Baruch haba, thank you for being with us. It's great to have you. We're all yours.
Thank you so much, Rav Yona. Great to be here. Thank you to Adina for providing our signing for tonight. This is wonderful. It's so great to see so many friends from Riverdale, from Skokie, from across the country. It's very exciting. And I'm excited to talk with you tonight about Shemitat Kesafim. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I think it gets underplayed when we think about Shemitah. Shemitah, I think many of us, especially if we've done some learning in this Beit Midrash or this year, we think about the environmental aspects, the ecological aspects, the spiritual aspects, all very beautiful, very important. The land, nature, critical aspects of Shemitah. But this other aspect of Shemitah, it kind of gets the third wheel, gets left out. Shemitat Kesafim. People don't always know what to do with it or how to understand it. And I think it's so important, it's so integral, and it has so much to say to all Jews, and I think even all humankind wherever we are. It's not limited, as we're going to see, to the land of Israel. It's a concept, it's a practice that is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. And my goal for this year is to learn about it with you and also to encourage you to find some ways to implement it into your individual lives, into your communal lives, and even into our nation. I think it's so important for the world right now to think about Shemitat Kesafim. So let's jump in. Shemitat Kesafim means the release. That means Shemitah, like Leshamet is to let go, and Kesafim is money. So Shemitat Kesafim literally means the release of money. And I want to share now, we'll take a look at some of the primary sources where it appears in the Torah. Shemitah appears in multiple times in the Torah, but Shemitat Kesafim only appears once. It's in the book of Dvarim, in Parshat Re'eh, and it's in an interesting section of the Torah that deals with poverty, debts and debt release, and kind of an economic vision for the whole society. Let's see, I should make this a little bigger. No, I can't. All right. I'll read back and forth Hebrew and English. Miketz sheva shanim taseh shmitah. At the end of the 7th year, so this is important. Shemitat Kesafim actually happens at the end of this year, right? It's kind of gearing up for it, and the release actually happens at the end, right before Rosh Hashanah of this coming year. The end of 7 years, taseh shmitah, you should do this release. V'zeh davar hashmitah, and this is what it is. Shamot kol bal mashe yado asher yashe bere'ehu. Every creditor shall remit the due that he claims from his fellow. Lo yigosh et re'ehu ve'et achiv ki kara shmitah lashem. You shall not bite, you shall not take the loan from your fellow or your kinsman, because it's a release for God. So what this means, lamaisa, practically, is that at the end of 7 years, you have to let go of any loans that you gave out. So if Rav Yonah came to me and said, can I borrow some money to buy a new car? And I lent him that money, and then come the end of this year, I said, I cannot go to him anymore and say, hey, Yonah, give me back the money that I lent to you. He could say, no, it's a Shemitah year. The Shemitah year is passed, and that debt is gone. So that's basically what it is. Now, as you can imagine, that has a lot of economic implications. To say that all debts must be canceled is a really big deal. So we're going to get to that. We're going to get into the economic applications. But first we do that, I think it's worth it to take a moment to understand where debt came from in these societies. We're talking in a Torah society, which is a predominantly agricultural society, right? We've entered Eretz Yisrael, we're farming, we're growing our crops, right? We're building communities and settlements. We're no longer a shepherding people as much, right? Our property, our value, our worth is coming predominantly from the earth. And if we think about how that's going to work financially, what's going to need to happen is each one of us who has our little farm, we're going to need seeds. We're going to need seeds because we're going to plow the seeds into the ground, and the seeds are going to grow, and they're going to give us our crops, and that's going to be our food for ourselves, and that's also going to be how we support our family financially. That's going to be the economy that we function in. Now the question is, well, what happens if one year there's a bad crop? What if there's a flood? What if there's a drought? So what's going to happen is all the investments that I made, the seeds that I put into the ground, they're not going to yield. And I'm going to have very little money. And I'm going to have nothing really to sell. And I'm not going to make a lot of money. And then the next year is going to come, and I'm going to need to go back to that same earth and that same field to grow my crops in order to sustain myself. But I'm not going to have any seed because I didn't have crops, and I'm not going to have any money because I didn't sell anything. So I'm going to need to take a loan. And this isn't a loan which I really have much of an option of taking. This is a loan which I must take, because if I don't take the loan to buy the seed, I'm not going to have anything to grow and to sustain my family with. I'm desperate. I have no choice in the matter. In fact, you could even look at the end of last week's Parsha Miketz, as a model of what happens when farmers, land doesn't yield, and how desperate they become, right? The farmers in the Egyptian society, as predicted by Yosef's dreams, became destitute because there was no crops. So they had to then go to Paro, and Paro says, okay, we'll give you seeds, but you have to give me your land in order to have food and seed. And so they give it all away. They give away everything they have. They give away their land, all their means of supporting themselves. They even allow themselves to be moved around, because when there's a drought and there's a famine and there's no seed, you have no other choice. You have to take a loan. You have to take any terms that someone will give you to get bread. And that can lead to tremendous exploitation. If you look at some of the history there, you could find, records of some of these contracts outside of Israel, but in the surrounding societies, and they detail the way that oftentimes the king would go and make loans to people who had suffered from drought or from famine or from flood and had their crops wiped out and had no way of supporting themselves. And the terms of the interest of the loans would be like 500%, 1,000%. These crazy terms on loans, which the people could never pay back. And so what happens? So you have to take the loan because you have no other choice. You need to feed your family. The terms of the loan are often incredibly onerous. You get into a cycle of debt and more debt and more debt and more debt, taking out more loans to pay the loans which you owe, which you have no chance of ever really paying back. And at a certain point, you're out of options and you owe so much. And the only option that's left when you owe that much, can anybody guess? You want to put into the chat? What's the only option left after you've taken all the loans and no one will loan to you anymore and you owe so much money on these loans? What is your last recourse? You have to give up the most servitude. Yeah, not bankruptcy. There's no concept of bankruptcy yet, Barry. It's a good guess. Slavery. You got it right. Everyone, you got it right. You have to sell yourself into slavery. And that happened. That happened a lot. Maybe it's a different, there are different kinds of servitude that would happen in the ancient world, indentured servitude, right? Different levels. But at the end of the day, what happens is you give up your body or your children's body. You sell your children. And that's something the Torah talks about. In order to serve a master because you have nothing else to give. So you go from being a farmer who's sustaining himself, just barely getting by on their land, borrowing some money to plant the seed, the sealed seed, you get a little money, you pay the debt back, right? And you kind of live on that level, subsistence, marginal level. And then as soon as there's some kind of calamity, or even not a calamity, just a setback, just not a great year, so quickly you spiral into this debt trap. And you can't get out. And the ultimate end of that debt trap is selling yourself into slavery. Now, the Torah doesn't want Jews to be slaves. God took us out of slavery. The whole point of Yetziat Mitzrayim is freedom to serve Hashem, not to be slaves once again. So the idea that people would be falling into debt and be getting trapped and then becoming slaves was very, very concerning for Hashem and for the Torah. And so that's really what Shemitat Kesafim is in place to deal with. It's to break the cycle of debt traps that lead to slavery and to make sure that people are still free. That's really what it's trying to do. And if you look, let's go back. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen again. Let's go back into Shemitat Kesafim. Okay. Now, if you look at the context in which Shemitat Kesafim appears, you can see it very clearly, right? So the first three psukim in this parsha, in this parak, are about Shemitat Kesafim. You got to release loans. Then, pasuk Daled, there shall be no needy among you, since the Lord your God will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, right? You're not going to have poverty. If only you heed the Lord your God, if you listen and do what Hashem says, he's going to bless you. You'll extend loans to many nations, but require none for yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you. Debt was a way that also, not just individually, but nationally, you could become a slave, a servant nation, when you become in debt to other nations. So this is kind of a promise or a vision that if we do right, we follow Hashem's way, that we will not become needy. But of course, the next pasuk, if, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen in any of your settlements, in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against the needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand, batoch tzizrach, and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. Okay? So this is all connected. This isn't separate mitzvot. We had the idea of Shemitah, and then we have this promise that if we really do right, people aren't going to be needy. But then we recognize people will be needy, and you have to lend to them, And then look at verse number 9. This is going to be important. Let's see it in the Hebrew. Where is it? Hishamer lecha pen yeh devar im levavacha bli ayol lemor. Be careful, because you may have this thing in your heart, this bli ayol thing. Bliol. Bliol is a great word. It means one way I like to think about it. It means bliol, without the yoke, right? This kind of yokeless thought. This kind of arrogant, I don't care about the Torah, I don't care about what Hashem says, I'm just going to do what's best for me. If you have this thought, you're going to think, Karva shnat hasheva shnat hashmita. Oh, the 7th year is coming. You're going to look at your brother who's poor, and you're going to have a bad eye on him. Veloti ten lo. Why are you going to have a bad eye? Because you think, oh, if I loan to him now, it's Kislev. And I know that by the end of next Elul, if I give him this loan, he's not going to have to pay it back. So I'm going to hold back from giving the loan. I'm not going to give him a loan. Don't think that, says the Torah. V'kara alav alecha el Hashem. He's going to call out on God to you. V'yeh b'cha chet. And it's going to be a sin for you, right? You got to give. You got to loan to the poor of your nation, even if you know you're going to take a loss or you're going to take a hit because at the end of the year, he's not going to have to pay it back. You got to loan to him. You got to help him get out of that debt trap. And you also got to help him eat and sustain himself, because without that loan, he's not going to be able to sustain himself. Give to him readily and have no regrets when you do, for in return the Lord will bless you in all your efforts and all your undertakings. For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land. It's the topic of another shiur, but it's so amazing, so interesting, right? Pasuk Dalid, there shall be no needy among you. Not going to have any poor. Verse 11, there will never cease to be poor amongst you, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor. We can talk about that another time, how that discrepancy. Verse 12, if a fellow he finds, this is the punchline though, remember the cycle from farmer to slave, right? Then it shows up right here. If a fellow Hebrew man or woman is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and the 7th year you shall set him free. Again, Hashem doesn't want us to be slaves. Slavery is bad. Hashem doesn't, I think, want anyone to be slaves. But we start with Am Yisrael and liberating ourselves from that trap of slavery, and then we go out and do that for the rest of the world. When you set him free, do not let him go empty-handed. Furnish him out of the flock, threshing floor, and vat with which the Lord has blessed you. So again, we see the treatment of the slave and even that 7-year cycle of releasing people from slavery. This has nothing to do with Shemitat Kesafim directly. It's a different concept. It's the concept of slavery, but it appears right after Shemitat Kesafim. So I just wanted to show how here the Torah is linking debt and slavery and Shemitah. It's all one economic package that the Torah wants us to be sensitive to. So that's the context. Shemitah is meant to break that slavery debt trap cycle. And as we're going through the shiur, I want to think about what Shemitah meant then, and also think about what that could mean today. That's really where we want to end up tonight, is how does these concepts apply to our world? I think they do very much. But before we do, we'll go a little further, just a few of the halachic details of Shemitah. Our time is a little limited, so I won't go through all these. These are just some excerpts from the Rambam, Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel. But let's see. Let's take a look. One interesting thing to know, that you can return a debt. Right? Just because the Shemitah year cancels all debts doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay somebody back. If I lent Yonah the money and Yonah has the money, it's a great thing to pay it back. Right? Shemitah is not like just a get out of jail free card, free money for people who took loans. And chas v'shalom, one should abuse it, right? One shouldn't take a loan, in the 7th year in order to kind of steal the money because they know that they don't have to pay it back. No, it's really for people who aren't able to pay it back. That's what this is geared towards. Now, let's take a minute. We should talk about prosbul, because when people think about Shemitah, this is probably Shemitah's most famous application in Jewish law. This is a concept that has a lot of... Can
I just cut you off for a while? I just want to jump in and point something out, just as we're thinking about Shemitah for a moment here, which is that when we think especially back to our last session with Rabbi Schaffner, we were thinking about Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael specifically, that it's very much a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, a land of Israel dependent mitzvah. When it comes to what you're talking about tonight, Shemitat Kesafim, it doesn't matter where you're located. Of course, the Torah is thinking of the perspective is on the land of Israel, but as you pointed out, the example of you and me, you're sitting in Chicago, I'm sitting in New York, I'm the loan shark, or you're the loan shark, right? Either way, but we're not in Israel. And this mitzvah of Shemitat Kesafim still applies. So it's just a different way of understanding
Absolutely.
Shemitah than the purely Eretz Yisrael focused kind of mitzvah.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah, and actually, we're going to get there in a second, but about both the question of land, is it Eretz Yisrael or all of the world, and about time. Some, Shemitah is it something that was in the past, and we'll see how Shemitat Kesafim is more relevant in certain ways, both geographically and chronologically. So great, we'll get there. First, I want to take a look at Prosbul, though, because Prosbul is a big deal, and we could spend a lot of sessions just on Prosbul itself, but it's worth seeing it if we're talking about Shemitat Kesafim. So, like all of the Torah, like all of Yahadut, we have these amazing ideas, big ideas, radical ideas. This is a radical idea. Let's underscore how dramatic this idea is for a society, that every 7 years, all private loans are released, are forgiven, no matter what, right? That's huge. That has huge economic implications. The Torah itself is aware of them, right? One basic economic, consequence we can, I'm sure, all think of is that, like the Torah said, people might not want to loan. People might just stop loaning because they don't want to take the loss. Now the Torah says, don't do that. You can't do that. You got to loan. But people are who they are. The Torah says things we should do, and we don't always live up to the Torah's standards for ourselves. So Hillel recognized a problem, that while the Torah was given to and directed at a society that was primarily agricultural, by the time of Hillel, just, I forget his exact dates, maybe, 70 BCE, something like that, a time of much greater economic activity. You had, global trade, you had markets and coins and technology, trade, economic activity was much greater than it was in the times, the time the Torah was given. And not only that, but Jewish people were also doing a lot more different things. Not everyone was a farmer. People were business and trading and economic financial instruments were much a bigger part of their lives and their livelihoods. And Shemitat Kesafim poses a real challenge to a lot of those economic instruments where you're depending on loans and being able to collect loans. So Hillel does something. Hillel hitkin Prosbul. Hillel instituted this thing called Prosbul. You may have heard of Prosbul. What is Prosbul? Tanan Hatam. Prosbul eino meshamet. Prosbul prevents the remission of debts. It's a way, I don't want to say it's around, but it's a way of, it's a way around. It's a way around the release of debts. How does it work? It used to be that, why did he do it? For he saw that people were unwilling to lend money to one another, right? Now that's a big deal. If people aren't willing to lend money, a lot of horrible things can happen. People can't start things. People can't get money who need it desperately to buy food for their families. Economic activity slows down. It's interesting, in Masechet Ta'anit, which is, I think the Daf Yomi is doing Ta'anit right now, or just finishing it, it's all about calamities, different calamities that can happen. And there are weather calamities, floods, there are animal calamities, lions and wolves come and eat people. One of the calamities, and Tanit is all about responding spiritually to calamities. So declaring a fast day for a calamity, or prayers, or how we respond to different calamities of different severities. One of the calamities described in Masechet Tanit is deflation, when money becomes worth too much. And how do you have deflation? When economic activity kind of slows down and people just hold on to money, there's no spending and there's no loaning, and prices go down, right? It's the opposite of what we're experiencing now. That's a very bad thing because no one's loaning, no one's buying, no one's selling, everyone's just holding on to what they have. And that has very disastrous consequences, especially for the poor, because they're not able to secure any funds. They're not able to, there's no economy happening. And so for deflation, the Masechet Tanit says you gotta do fasts and really, cry out. So that's what that's what Hillel was worried about. He was worried that if people are not loaning, it'll have a very, very negative impact, especially, on everybody, on all businesses. Everything will stop, and we don't want that to happen. So Amad v'hitkin prosbul. He got up and he said, okay, there's a new thing called prosbul. V'zeh gufo shel prosbul. This is prosbul. Mosreini lachem ploni dayanim shemakom ploni shekol chov sheyesh li etzel ploni shagbo kol zman she'ertzeh v'ha'dayanim chotzmin lemate o ha'edim. The word prosbul works as follows. A person can, me and Yona, right? Rav Yona. So I lent Rav Yona $10,000 to buy a new car. I can take my loan, the written loan that I have, and I give it to the judge. And I say, the judge, the Beit Din, you now are holding my loan, and instead of me holding the loan and it being canceled because it's now held by the Beit Din, it doesn't get canceled. Prosbul cancels Shemitat Kesafim cancels private loans, but a loan or a debt to the Beit Din is not canceled. So it transfers the ownership of the debt sort of to the Beit Din, but I can still collect it. So it's a way around Shemitat Kesafim. And I have, I'm sure we all have mixed feelings about rabbinic workarounds. On the one hand, they're so important because they allow things to function, right? They allowed the possibility of selling chametz, allowed all the Jews who had major businesses in whiskey and alcohol to survive in the Middle Ages. The Eruv allows people to bring their children to shul. They're very, very important. On the other hand, they kind of undermine this amazing thing. Like on Pesach, you shouldn't have any chametz. On Shabbos, you shouldn't carry anything in your pockets. On Shemitah, you shouldn't carry any loads, right? So it's a complicated thing. I think in the time of Hillel, again, he probably had to do a very, delicate balance, two competing values: the value of this important Torah mitzvah and in preserving it in its fullest integrity, and the value of people being able to eat and the economy running. And he found a way to hold both, to not get rid of Shemitah. Shemitah is still here. You still have to write a prosbul. It still exists, but a way to perhaps mitigate it in a way that's going to allow the economy to function. So that's prosbul. And if we want to talk about Shemitat Kesafim, it's important to see prosbul for a little bit. But I want to move past prosbul and keep going to the point that Rav Yona made. That Shemitat Kesafim, prosbul or not, by the way, prosbul, you have to do it. If you don't write a prosbul, the loan is still operative. If you write the prosbul and give the loan over to the Beit Din, does prosbul work? It doesn't just automatically cancel the effect of Shemitat Kesafim on all loans. No, without the prosbul, you 100% have to forgive the loan. So prosbul or not, whether you have a prosbul or not, Shemitat Kesafim probably applies today, right? If you look at the next source, the Masechet Gitin, Rabbi says this is the word Hashmita. There's two Shmitot, right? B'shtei Shmitot hakatuv medaber. Echad Shmitat Karka. One is the Shmita of the land. V'echad Shmitat Kesafim, and one is the Shmita of the money. And in a time when you do not do Shmita of the land, you do not do Shmita of money, but the rabbis established that we still do Shmitat Kesafim to remind us of Shemitah in general. So while midoraita on a biblical level, they're connected, and if we don't do Shmitat Karka, the resting of the land, then we don't do Shmitat Kesafim. Chazal said, but on a rabbinic level, we're going to maintain Shmitat Kesafim to remember this practice of Shvit, because it's very important and it's very real. And so we see there's the Rambam brings us down. According to rabbinic law, the nullification of debts applies in the present age in all places, even though the Jubilee year is not observed. And this is instituted so the concept of the nullification of debts will not be forgotten by the Jewish people. I apologize, I think I'm talking too fast. I'll slow it down. So it still applies. It's such an important idea. We don't want to forget it. Anytime it applies, and also any place. It applies anywhere. Okay, a little more discussion. The Ramah, the Pitrei Tshuva encourage us to keep Shemitah. Even if it's not on a Torah level, although the Ramban believes it's even on a Torah level, Shemitat Kesafim, the release of debts, still, we should all take it very seriously. Shemitat Kesafim still applies today, at least on a rabbinic level, and it's worth us all taking seriously. Okay, Barry Mogul, is prosbul binding on the creditor assigner to Beit Din? I'm not sure what those words mean because I'm not a legal expert. Creditor assigner. Larry Wanger's on the call. He's my
I'm sorry, can
Rebbe.
you repeat the question?
Oh, he wrote it to me personally. I'll put it so everyone can see.
Okay.
There's a lot of people in here who are probably a lot smarter about this stuff than I am. I mentioned Larry, who I'll has been helping me with the project we're hoping to do here. If anyone can translate those words into non-legalese, I might be able to understand them. Okay, so I want to now shift gears. We got about 12 minutes left, and I want to talk about Shemitat Kesafim today. On a basic level, it probably applies. So if you loaned money to somebody and you're expecting it back, and you have no prosbul, and the end of the Shemitah year is coming around, at the end of next Elul, you probably don't have that loan anymore. They don't owe you that money. So that's an important thing, and I'm sure each of our own financial situations and who we're loaning to and why, a lot of potential complexities in there. But that's probably how we should understand this on a Torah level, on a halachic level. But I want to expand it out to not just our own personal loans, but to think about debt in our society, for a moment. So going back to the beginning, Shemitat Kesafim exists to prevent people from slipping into cycles of poverty and debt and ultimately slavery. The Torah doesn't want that to happen. And though we don't have debt slavery today in America, at least anymore, although actually I was just reading about some farms I believe it was in Alabama or Georgia, where migrant workers were brought over, and it was a form of debt slavery. They have to pay a certain amount of money to qualify to be brought over and be these workers, and then they're here, they're undocumented, and they were being paid. I think it was something like literally 20 cents an hour. I mean, they were paid by the agricultural work they were doing, but it was just nothing, and they had no rights and they had no recourse because they're undocumented, and there was all kinds of horrific abuse and rape. It's basically like a form of modern day slavery. Maybe I'll try to find that article and pop it in the chat. So we like to think that we're beyond that as a society and as a world, but actually probably we're not in many places. But even if we say that we are, or the average American citizen is not going to be subject to that, still I think it's worth it to think about debt and debt traps and what we can fall into, and not just the economic impact, but also the spiritual impact of the debt cycle and debt traps on the neshamot, on the souls of people. There's a lot of debt in America. People are carrying a tremendous amount of debt. People are carrying a tremendous amount of student loans. The college tuition these days, it's insane, and the amount of debt that people are graduating with, $100,000, $200,000. People going to graduate schools where the debt loads, $500,000. Tremendous amounts of debt. Oftentimes, for some of these programs, with really very little hope of paying it back in any reasonable amount of time. The costs are just so great. In addition to student loan debt, credit card debt is very high. Also, one of the most 50% of all bankruptcies in America are caused by medical debt. Medical debts are a tremendous source of just that financial trap that if you're uninsured or underinsured, breaking a bone, breaking an arm, or having a baby, or getting cancer, chas v'shalom, all those things can really set someone back tremendously financially with the costs associated with healthcare today. So people are in a lot of debt, and we have a vision of debt as it's people are lazy, or people just want to buy a new fancy TV or something like that, or are reckless with their credit cards. And surely there are people who go into debt, who make bad choices. That definitely does exist. But I think for many, many, many people, going into debt and getting into that debt trap is about getting an education, paying for medical bills, right? Things that are very, reasonable, appropriate things to have to go into debt for. Trying to better one's future or protect one's health or one's loved one's health. And people get into these traps. And the traps are very real. And once you get into these debt traps, it can be very, very hard to get out. There are, predatory loan companies all across America. It's a very unregulated industry. You can be charged, 500% for a loan, even more. I've heard 800%. These payday loan places that you see all over, less financially secure neighborhoods. Those are places that we could debate about payday loans, and there's arguments on both sides. But at the end of the day, these are people who make money make money based on people's debt situation and the idea that they're not going to be able to pay it back, right? Why do you charge such high interest? Because you know that they're going to keep getting stuck in it, and they're going to have to take another loan out to cover the other loans. Muriel Goldsmith shares that there was an article today about people in Florida responsible for paying legal costs, right? And the debt compounds, and they're not allowed to vote, right? So these debt traps are very, very real, and they cause a lot of damage. They cause a lot of damage financially. They also cause a lot of damage spiritually. Debt is a great harm to relationships. It's a great source of shame. It's one of the most common causes of divorce. Being in debt leads to health problems, to emotional difficulty, and down the line, homelessness, and tragically even suicide are often linked to debt. So debt is not just a financial issue. It's an emotional issue. It's a spiritual issue. Many people are putting things in the chat. If you want to put links, links to some of these books and resources if people want to learn more. These are very, very serious issues which affect millions and millions of Americans. And the Torah has this amazing idea that every 7 years, people should be lifted out of it. Originally, the Torah's idea is that people should forgive it. My debt to you should be forgiven. I don't know if we'll be able to convince corporate America and the debt companies and the payday loans and the prison, debt companies and whatever to forgive the loans every 7 years. That doesn't feel like it's a reach we can do now. But I think the idea that a society focuses itself every 7 years on lifting people out of debt is something that we can start to embrace and to apply. And something we're hoping to do here in Chicago with actually something we started 7 years ago in Riverdale at the HIR was on just a very simple level, financial literacy workshops. Offering, for this year, offering financial literacy workshops to help people who are in debt to learn the tools and learn some of the techniques to help them get out of it. I've worked with people in my shul who have, stumbled into these cycles and credit cards and all these things. And there's a wonderful organization here called the ARC, which offers financial counseling. And better than any check from the discretionary account that I can write is to get them sitting down with a financial counselor who can help them look at their picture, help them consolidate some of their debts, negotiate with the debtors a little bit, and get themselves in a much better financial position. And it's amazing to say that many people have gotten themselves out of debt with these programs. So there's a lot of information that people just don't have, and again, the shame and the confusion and the pressure, people calling your house all the time. Debt collectors can be so aggressive. If you give people some basic tools and skills, many people can work their way out of it and get themselves out of that cycle. In addition, I'll share something that we're hoping to do this coming year. There is an organization. I think Larry's on. Larry, if you can even pop the link in the chat. Larry Wenger, a member of the Skokie Valley here. I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's an organization that buys medical debt on the debt market, and then let me back up for a second. This is how medical debt works. Let's say I go to the hospital, I break my arm, I get a $20,000 bill for my ER visit. I can't pay that. The hospital then sells my debt to a medical debt collector. And the medical debt collector will start harassing me. But the medical debt collector knows that I'm never going to have the $20,000 to pay. They hope to get, $1,000 from me. So the hospital sells it to the medical director for $500, and then the medical debt collector collects $1,000, and they make a $500 profit on my $20,000 debt. So Larry posted in RAP Medical Debt. What they do, it's so amazing. These are two guys who were formerly in this business of medical debt collection. They go into the marketplace and they buy the medical debts for literally pennies on the dollar. Like, you can go, they bundle these debts together. You could buy, $100,000 worth of medical debt for literally $1,000 or $2,000, right? Pennies on the dollar. And they, instead of collecting the debt, they release it. So it's a great way to leverage, a little bit of money to make a huge impact. They've released, millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars after raising only, thousands of dollars. So we're looking to launch a campaign in partnership, hopefully with actually a church on the south side of Chicago that we have a relationship with, Bright Star Church, led by Pastor Chris Harris. What we're going to do is we're going to come together as two faith communities, as two biblical faith communities that have this value of Shemitat Kesafim. This is biblical, right? This isn't rabbinic. This is in the Torah, in the Bible. And we are going to raise money together to hopefully buy medical debt from people in Illinois and release it. And that will be, the power of faith communities coming together using biblical faith values to really change lives and free people from this trap, which exists in such nefarious ways right now. So that's an example of taking these ancient, powerful biblical ideas about debt and the spiritual urgency of releasing people from debt, and then trying to apply them and make them real in the 21st century today, using these Torah ideas to change people's lives. That's what I get really excited about, because for me, that's what, all this stuff that's academic and it's fascinating, and the history and the halacha, it's really, really cool. But at the end of the day, it's got to make an impact. If it's just ideas, if it's just a topic, if it's just a machloket, what are we doing it for? So that's one taste of Shemitat Kesafim, which we're interested in. And I want to encourage everyone to think about one way you can bring it into your life. Again, maybe it's letting go of a debt that someone, that you lent to somebody at one point, and just saying, I release it. I release that debt. Maybe it's even on a spiritual level. I've thought about this. It doesn't even have to be a financial debt, but maybe it's a debt, someone owes you something. Someone owes you a favor. Someone owes you a phone call. Someone owes you an apology. You feel like someone owes you something and you're just holding on to it. Let it go. Shemitat Kesafim. Let that debt go. It's not worth it. Let it go. That could be another way of approaching this concept. Offering financial literacy. If you're an accountant or you're a financial person, offering your services to someone who maybe is in some debt and helping them get out of it. Talking about debt, reducing some of the stigma around debt. We have such stigma. There's such shame around debt and these debt traps. And I think for people to know that, it's not necessarily your fault, right? There are companies and industries that are based on getting you into debt and want to keep you in debt and want to milk your money from you from that debt. And, telling people, hey, it's not your fault and there's things you can do and you're not alone. Millions of Americans are in this position with you, and let's work together to get ourselves out of it. Those are just a few things that we can do to take these Torah values and make them real in our complicated world of the 21st century, which was just like the complicated world in the first century and the negative 5th century and all these times. It's always the same financial pressures and traps and debt and hope and release. Like, all these things have always been around, and we just got to keep plugging away and doing our part to bring those Torah values to bear on those very real problems. So that's my spiel. I see Yona's popped back on. If anyone has any questions, I know the hour is getting late, but
we do have a few minutes. We do indeed have a few minutes if people want to put some questions into the chat. While people are typing, if they have anything, I'll point out. I really love, Rabbi Ari, how you brought a spiritual aspect to all of this. The feeling that this is spiritual work. We don't separate in our tradition between the material and the spiritual. The gashmi and the ruchani are so closely linked to each other. And really the tzedakah aspect of all of this, the fact that there's a real opportunity here to follow through on a Torah value. And even if I'm not the one per se who can forgive a debt, because I may not have a debt to forgive in this case, but I can help other people get out of that situation and have that reset. I think that's very, very powerful. So I want to really thank you for using those examples and providing for us a framework, perhaps in our communities to either come to your community and participate with what you're doing, or to try to follow that model where we are as well. I see there's a couple of things popping into the chat. Let's take a look if there's our questions. A couple of thank yous, always very nice.
Someone asked for the sources. I'm going
Yeah.
to put them in a moment. And well, I can't see the screen, so if there's a question, well, I'm just getting this in. How do I do this? Eva asks a very good question. Because the Torah and the prose were meant to serve simpler times, but I don't know current rebbeim good halacha development that legislates against abusive debt collection in a more nuanced way. So another aspect of this is the question of rebate, of interest, right? Which is always forbidden, and also so radical and interesting, right? You're forbidden from loaning, at least amongst the community, with interest. And then the rabbis then come up with a way to loan with interest, because again, there's this tension between these beautiful, pristine values and market realities that people are dependent upon. It's not just like, oh, the rich people have to get profit. No, it's like everybody needs a functioning economy. Everybody needs there to be a market where that works and that is sustainable, because we all need to buy food. We all need all these things. So there's always this tension there. But we can always return to those values of Shemitat Kesafim, and also of the danger of interest. Of interest as a very dangerous tool, perhaps necessary in certain cases, or at least profit on loan necessary in certain cases, as we come up with Hetzer Iska and those types of financial mechanisms, but the real spiritual danger involved in those. Any other?
Meryl Goldsmith just pointed out that last Shemitah, there was an Israeli organization that was giving financial counseling and that was getting banks to forgive participants' debt. So that's positive.
Yes, that was at Pa'amonim. And I remember learning a little bit about them. I know they did the financial counseling. I don't know if they also got the banks to forgive. That's amazing. Is there bankruptcies?
Rabbi, can I ask you, if we have a couple of minutes before we end, can you speak a little bit more about, I know you're creating this organization, Solu. I know you're doing a lot of work in Chicago to go beyond just the local community, the local Jewish community. I'm wondering how this all plays together. In other words, how you find this working. What are the real wins that you're seeing, and how are these models really for other communities to follow as well? If I could ask you to talk about what you're doing a little bit more. I think it's really a great model for the rest of us to be thinking about.
Sure. I really believe in this stuff. I think that these big ideas about debt and justice and poverty are just as urgent today as they ever were. And I think they have messages and resonance for beyond our community. I think we have something to offer the world as Jews with these timeless spiritual messages about making the world a better place. And something that's always been a part of my rabbinate and why I became a rabbi is to try to reach out to other faith communities and non-faith communities, other different kinds of people who share some of these core values, and try to build partnerships and make them real. Make these values real. Make it a real thing that affects real people's lives. And we've had the real bracha to start doing some of that work here in Chicago. Like Rav Yonah said, we started something called Solu. Solu means make a path. It comes from the Haftarah on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, it's this day of ritual and fasting, very ritualized day. And in the middle of the day, we read this crazy Haftarah from Yeshayahu that says, Hashem hates your rituals. He hates your fasting if you don't do justice alongside of it. If all you're doing is these rituals and fasting and feeling bad about yourself, but you're not feeding the hungry and you're not clothing the naked and you're not loosening the bonds of oppression, Hashem hates it. So it's a very powerful message. And Solu means make a path, like make a path, make a road, make a way for the people to live up to their highest moral and spiritual callings. So that's what Solu is, that broadly, and what it is on the ground is trying to make a path for our community to get involved in things like feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and loosening the bonds of oppression. We've had the zchut of working with a lot of different communities here in Chicago, whether it's the Rohingya community. The Rohingya community is a Muslim minority in Burma that's been the target of genocide, recognized by the State Department as a genocide, one of the current only active genocides in the world today. Very horrific things happening in Myanmar. They've come, there's the largest Rohingya community in North America is in Chicago, literally across the street from the Jewish community, just across Western, if you know Rogers Park. Like you could see Tel Aviv pizza from the Rohingya Culture Center. And talk about debt, talk about financial literacy. We've done some work with them. Zero financial literacy, zero literacy. Most of them are not able to read and write. And they get predatory loans, and people come up to them and get them to sign all kinds of things and get them these debt traps, and it's really horrific. So a lot of the work that they do is just trying to educate their people about how the debt system works, how just financial systems work in America. So we've worked with them and supported them and doing a lot of projects and things with them. Another thing we've been working on is working on the south side of Chicago. I mentioned Pastor Chris Harris. We have a relationship with the Bright Star Community Outreach. Bright Star Community Outreach is a really fascinating story. They have a model of a program where they work with victims of gun violence on the south side of Chicago. As many of you know, horrific gun violence in the south side of Chicago, lots of trauma. They imported an Israeli trauma model called the Natal Center, which worked with victims of terror to help them deal with the trauma, process it, and lead healthy lives. They took that model of counseling and brought it to the south side of Chicago. They have credit. It's all through the Israeli consulate. It's really an amazing story. So we have a relationship with them. We actually built together a literacy center. We just completed it a few weeks ago. We converted sort of kind of an empty room in their church, it's a big room, to a state-of-the-art, brand new free library, computer resource center, literacy center, homework help. They have tutors. The kids come after school. They take free books. They play games. They get computer skills, and trying to make up for what's been lost, especially in the last year and a half of COVID, where there was such disruption to all schooling, but especially to kids in underserved communities. Just massive disruption. Chicago Public Schools has something like 19,000 kids who they have no idea where they are, just disappeared from the system. So a lot of really urgent educational needs and psychosocial needs in that community. So we built this literacy center not as a panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but for the people in Bronzeville who come, and there are many, hopefully it's a way for them to just be grounded and get some of the skills and literacy. Those are just a couple examples. And with Pastor Harris, we're hoping to do this medical debt. I have a meeting with him tomorrow. We're going to be discussing how we can move forward on this medical debt campaign. I know Larry Wenger, who's here, is anxious to get started. He's been really helpful in getting the information. Those are a few examples of some of the stuff that we're doing. And
thank you.
Yeah, I know my time.
Yeah, I know that's great. I actually, as I'm hearing you talk about all of this, I'm, there's a word in our tradition, and it's associated with Hanukkah actually, for really looking at what's the best way to do a mitzvah, right? We think about, okay, I can figure it out in terms of what's what's the b'diavad and everything, but really, there's a way to do things which is better, which is what's called mahadrin. And then there's mahadrin min ha-mahadrin. And certainly the things that you were talking about provide for us an example of how to think about Shemitah, how to think about our lives and our values, and bringing the values of Shemitah and the values of Judaism into every aspect of what we do in our spiritual life, in our business life, in all aspects of our ethical endeavors. And all of our endeavors should be ethical. So I really want to thank you, Rabbi Ari, for bringing that to the fore tonight. I want to invite everyone.
I just want to say that it's not a solo endeavor. Mira Goldsmith is on this call, one of the really leading thinkers in these issues globally, and how to make these values real. Elliot Rabin, someone who's a chavruta of mine in Riverdale. We have many great thinkers of Torah and the world and how to make it real. And many of my teachers were on this call, so I just want to be, and I'm sure there are others as well, but just want to acknowledge
Amazing. Thank you for pointing that out. And exactly, the more we can build this community out, the more we can all be talking about this, the better we'll do with our Jewish values and bringing this to the world. I do want to invite everyone to our next session, which will feature Rabbi Yafa Epstein. Tonight is the last night of her Sheva Brachot. She got married last week, and we'll get to greet her 1 month from now. Not the first Sunday in January, but the second Sunday in January 2022, January 9th, where she'll speak about the topic of For the Rest of Us, a year of rejuvenation. So we'll think in terms of Shemitah, another spiritual aspect of Shemitah, how we renew ourselves during this important year. I do want to thank a number of people before we all say goodnight. I want to thank, as I did before, Adina Leitner for being our ASL interpreter tonight. I want to thank Esther Mack, who has been typing nonstop in the background, closed captioning for us all. And I want to thank Matisse and Mark Aronson for sponsoring our ASL and closed captioning interpretation services tonight and every time we have our Beit Midrash throughout the year. So thanks to you. Finally, a special thank you to Rabbi Ari Hart, who, as always, is an example of spiritual leadership, of ethics, of morality, and of bringing that home in every way to all of our homes, wherever we find ourselves tonight. On this final night of Hanukkah, therefore, I will wish us all a Chag Urim Sameach, and as we watch the candles burn one last time tonight, may we think about how it is that we will bring the light of Hanukkah out on the 9th night of Hanukkah, tomorrow night. What are we going to do? How do we take the light of Hanukkah beyond our homes and share it and spread it to all the dark corners of the earth? We have examples to think about from tonight. I wish us all luck and success in this important endeavor as we continue to think about the values in the Torah of Shemitah. Can't wait to see you again at the beginning of 2022. Laila Tov, thank you so much for being here tonight. Bye-bye. You can all put in the chat, thank Rabbi Ari, he deserves it.